everyone. I know that examination is around the corner and right now the preparation will be going on full speed. So I'm here to tell you what are the mistakes that students make while preparing for business economics paper. So top mistakes students make in business economics. First of all, the lot of information and lot of ideas are given in your ICI material. But remember, any competitive examination is not about studying everything, because you are not going to get questions from everything. It's not a BCom examination or any other graduation examination wherein you have luxury of time. So you have to keep your preparation very focused on the most important topics, the core topics from where all the questions are going to be asked. So don't make the mistake of opening your ICI book and reading from line to line, from page to page. This way you will not be able to retain the ideas and the concepts, and everything will jumbled up. So when you scan through all the questions asked in the previous examination, you will find that there are some topics from where repeated questions are asked by changing the options, the language of the options, the language of the questions. So if you have an idea about the core concepts, then you can easily score upwards of 90 in the subject of business economics. So where our focus should lie? First of all, from chapter 1, you need to focus the concepts given by Lionel Robbins. It means what we call it as scarcity principle. It means with regard to scarcity of resources, unlimited wants and alternative uses of resources, and from where they ask you the central problems. Then you will always get one question with regard to pragmatic and normative. Focus on that. Additionally, they can give you example based question with regard to what is microeconomics and what is macroeconomics. So do know the difference between the two. And then finally they can also ask you question with different types of characteristics that you have in capitalist economy, mixed economy and socialist economy. So from chapter 1, you will find largely the question will be revolving around this. And of course, they have recently started to ask also the question with regard to what is the relationship between economics and business economics. So we know that business economics uses the tools provided by the subject of economics to take business decisions. When you cover this, you cover all aspects from where the questions are going to be asked. Now when you go to chapter 2, chapter 2 is overwhelming because a lot of tidbits of ideas and informations have to be there. But if you focus on again the core concept, it will cover all those tidbits of information. So here you will find generally always they ask you question with regard to the definition of demand. They will ask you about law of demand, and a lot of question will be cluttered around elasticity of demand. And what I found is that an important focus under the elasticity of demand is given on proportionate method and outlay method, because the outlay or the expenditure method, if you understand, its relevance is also there in terms of revenue of the seller. That is there as a part of your chapter 4. So elasticity of demand, you have to figure out where the elasticity is more, where the elasticity is less, what makes the elasticity of demand to be more, what makes it less, different degrees of elasticity, more than one, less than one, infinite, in what kind of goods are there in those in different degree of elasticity. Then comes the supply. So supply compared to demand, they don't ask as many questions, but when it comes to comparison between supply and demand, you get a lot of questions. So again, simply from the supply definition, they ask you a question. Then again, about elasticity of supply, you'll get some questions from there. And one thing I forgot to mention here, that is one question you always get from exceptions to the law of demand. Exception to the law of demand, given goods, Veblen effect, and speculative goods. So in case of elasticity of supply, they can also ask you in which cases the law of supply do not work. Agriculture goods in the short run, antiques and land both in the short and in the long run. So different degrees of elasticity, E more than one, less than one, everything you have to cover. And then finally comes with regard to equilibrium, wherein they will ask you what will be the effect when there is excess supply over demand or excess demand over supply, and what happens due to increase or decrease in price. Then combining supply and demand, they ask a question on determination of price, wherein they'll ask you, let's say demand is increasing and supply remaining constant, it means rightward shift in the demand curve, what will be the effect on price and what will be the effect on quantity. So there they can ask you 14 different situations: demand increases, supply remains constant, or vice versa, or supply increases, demand remains constant, and vice versa. In cases when demand and supply both increases, rightward shift will happen, then what will be the impact on price and quantity. So you have to cover that very nicely. Then again in the second chapter we come across the consumer behavior. So one question with regard to utility, they will always ask utility, and then under utility, upon cardinal principle, cardinal where Marshall did a lot of work, and ordinal principle, ordinal approach where Hicks and Allen did a lot. So they will be asking, the question will be cluttered around here. Under the cardinal approach, they will ask you definitely a couple of questions on law of diminishing marginal utility, and ordinal indifference analysis. They will ask you indifference curve analysis. And then always you will find one question related to the concept of budget line. They will ask you the question related to consumer surplus and consumer equilibrium, and also consumer equilibrium from the perspective of budget line and indifference curve you always get. So when you cover these things, your chapter 2 is over. You have to cover. Now saying these things, of course, it's easier, but the thing is, when you have clarity of concepts, then no problem, you can just get huge number of marks from these particular topics. Then comes the theory of production. Remember, in theory of production, one question you will always get from the production function, and the assumption in the production function like technology and methods of production remain constant, and there will always be maximum production with minimum use of input. That's what every producer wants to have. And then you will find a lot of question will be cluttered around law of variable proportion and law of returns to scale. Please cover these topics very nicely. Then when it comes to cost, please try to understand the difference between economic cost, accounting cost, and implicit cost, accounting and non-accounting cost. And then you will have to focus on total fixed cost, the diagram related to it, average fixed cost, the diagram related to it, total variable cost, total cost, and the relationship between total cost and total variable cost, relationship between average fixed cost and average total cost, When you have ATC, so they'll ask you what is the reason, for example, that ATC and curve, they and total average total cost curve and average variable cost curve, they come together, and what is the reason for TC and TVC curve to be parallel to one another? Because the presence between them, the difference between them is due to the total fixed cost curve, total fixed cost. A lot of question is asked about marginal cost, wherein they'll simply ask you the formula and they will ask you what is the nature of the marginal cost curve, and of course relationship between MC, AVC and ATC they will also ask you. You will find that planning curve or long run average cost curve से बहुत सारा questions आता है. A lot of questions you will get from here, and we know that it is nothing but it shows long term expansion in the business. So please remember the difference between increasing returns, diminishing returns, constant returns and negative returns. Internal and external economies and diseconomies are also important, that is economies of scale and diseconomies of scale. Then when you go to chapter 4, perfect competition is very important. There you have to figure out the characteristics of the perfect competition, characteristics of perfect competition. Then unique feature of a perfect competition is straight line demand curve is there with perfect elasticity. Then you have to find out production continue and discontinue decision, wherein we compare price with the average variable cost, and profit and loss situation, wherein we compare AR and ATC. Also a lot of question you will get from marginal revenue and marginal cost comparison, wherein we try to figure out where is the firm's equilibrium is lying. Monopolistic market, again simple characteristic they'll ask you. Monopoly also simple characteristic. Monopoly they can ask you a little more question because it is a part of the market failure that we study in public finance, that is your chapter 7. And in monopoly they will different types of price discrimination given by Prigau, first degree, second degree and third degree, and what is price discrimination also they will ask you, conditions of price discrimination. In oligopoly what I have found is that question from price leadership, that is partial oligopoly, Kincaid demand curve, that is price rigidity, alright, collusive oligopoly which includes syndicate and organized oligopoly, the questions are cluttered over here. When you go to chapter 5, that is business cycle, so please focus on the characteristics of the business cycle, also the different components at expansionary stage, contractionary stage, peak and trough, reasons for the business cycle, causes of business cycle, exogenous, endogenous causes, and also in the business cycle you have to always, they will ask you a question with regard to economic indicator, that is coincident indicator like leading and lagging indicator. When you go to national income, please don't get bogged down by the equation. Equations are important, but if you refer the class notes you will be able to figure out that a lot of questions are asked from there, wherein you have to figure out which equation is correct. For example, they can say GDP at market price if I want to find out. So if I have NDP at market price, then how can I get GDP at market price from NDP at market price? We know the difference between gross and net is depreciation. So if we deduct depreciation from the net domestic product at market price, what you get is the gross domestic product at market price. So you have to be very proficient with the equation. Please focus on the different methods of measuring national income, value added, expenditure method and income method, and limitations of national income you have to do. Under Keynesian model, investment multiplier is very important. Consumption function, consumption which is a function of income, is also important. All right. Then you have to focus upon marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save. Numerical question related to it. Leakages, you have to focus what is the reason for decline in the investment multiplier. And 3 sector model, government intervention, and 4 sector model, external, export and import. If you cover this, that's more than enough. Of course, you have to also figure out equilibrium, and especially when equilibrium, when you're talking about, they can ask you question with regard to inflationary gap and contractionary gap. When you go to chapter 7, you are in chapter 7, there are a lot of information in there that becomes overwhelming for the student, but you need to focus on the only important topics, like what are the functions of the government given by Richard Musgrave. Richard Musgrave, that is allocation function, redistribution and function, and stabilization function of the government. Then you have to find out what are the reasons for market failure. Market failure अच्छे से पढ़ने का. What steps taken by the government to decrease market failure. Then you have to focus on externalities. Then you have to also figure out the characteristics of public goods, and you will get related question from here. Public goods, what is a mixed public good? What is a impure public good? Why public goods are underproduced and underconsumed in the economy, right? So all these things, externalities, negative consumption externalities, negative production externalities, positive production and positive consumption externalities, we have to cover it nicely. Then about demerit goods and merit goods, you will always get one question: demerit and merit goods. Then non-market pricing, that is price floor and price ceiling. You'll always get question from here. Then when you go to fiscal policy, expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy, you have to find out, and different tools with regard to it, that is implication of taxes, implication of government expenditure, implication of borrowings on the fiscal policy, and what type of fiscal policy is adopted during which economic time period. For example, expansionary will be adopted to promote economic growth during contractionary period, and contractionary fiscal policy is targeted in bringing down inflation rate, so it will be adopted when there is high inflation or hyperinflation in the economy. And in case of budget, please focus on fiscal deficit and primary deficit. Also remember the article number with regard to budget. Finance Commission, role of Finance Commission is important. Process of budget making, again very important, and different tools on the expenditure and the receipt side. For example, what is a non-debt receipt, what is a debt creating receipt, what is capital expenditure, what is revenue expenditure. All these things you have to keep in mind. For example, dividend received by the government on the profit of the public sector undertaking is a non-debt creating revenue receipt. When government sells away public asset, like for example, government sold away Air India, that is disinvestment, that is a capital receipt, but it is non-debt creating. When government borrows, it is a capital receipt, but government will have to repay, but so it becomes a debt creating capital receipt. So this distinction you have to know very nicely. When you do this, your chapter 7 is completely over. Then in chapter 8, you have to focus on the various theories of of money demand. For example, there QTM, quantity theory of money given by Fisher, is important. Cash balance approach given by Pigou, Marshall, Keynes and Robertson are important. Then you have liquidity preference theory. These three theories are very important. You cannot ignore this theory. When it comes to money supply, please focus on the concept of money multiplier and concept of credit multiplier, and also the concept with regard to the behavior of the central bank, behavior of the commercial bank, that is reserves to deposit ratio, and behavior of the public, that is cash to deposit ratio or currency to deposit ratio, that plays a very, very important role. That will cover up your concept of demand for money, when concept of supply of money, sorry. Then when it comes to monetary policy, please focus on the various tools, expansionary and contractionary monetary policy. For example, repo and reverse repo, what effect will it have, and when it will be increased or decreased. Repo and reverse repo both will be increased in order to contain inflation. Then CRR and SLR ka difference. They can also ask you where SLR can be invested, cash, government bonds, all these things, state developmental loans, it can be given. Then they can ask you about liquidity adjustment facility and marginal standing facility, and then market stabilization scheme, MSS. And sometimes they'll also ask you ways and means advances. So this is more than enough if you cover from monetary policy. When it comes to international trade, please remember the advantages and disadvantages of international trade. Then in the theories, mercantilist theory, theory of absolute and comparative advantage, factor endowment theory are very, very important. Then when it go to the instruments of trade policy, please remember tariff, different types of tariff, compound tariff, specific tariff, mixed tariff, ad valorem tariff. Then you have bound tariff and countervailing duty, and anti-dumping duty, that is trigger price mechanism. Then you have most favored nation status concept given by many countries, preferential tariff. These things, these tariffs, you have to do it nicely. This is more than enough. If you cover these tariffs, that's fine. Effect of tariff, you have to figure out, very, very easy. 4-5 points, it will be over. And then when you go to the next chapter, that is your chapter 3, you have to just focus on what are the reasons due to which GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, was it lost its relevance, and that led to the creation of WTO after successive rounds which began in Uruguay, which led to finally passing of the Marrakesh Agreement in 1994, leading to creation of WTO. What was the reasons that led to creation of WTO? That will give you also the difference between GATT and WTO. Then guiding principles of WTO, and why the developing countries are not happy with the WTO, or why WTO is losing its relevance, under which again Doha development round is important. Then when you come to the determination of nominal exchange rate, you please figure out what are the characteristics of the foreign exchange market, who are the participants in the foreign exchange market. Small questions they can ask you with regard to arbitrage, with regard to different types of regime, whether it's a fixed exchange rate regime or a flexible exchange rate regime, or a soft peg or a hard peg, they can ask you. And the benefits and the disadvantages of those two, how nominal exchange rate is determined, you have to figure it out, and what are the effect of appreciation and depreciation. If you cover this, that's more than enough. Then when you go to the next unit, that is about international capital movement, please focus upon the difference between FDI and FII, the benefits, that is advantages and disadvantages of FDI, and what safeguard mechanism can be adopted. One question you always get, from where FDI is not permitted, in which sector FDI is not permitted. So if you focus on these things, that's more than enough. And finally, when they also ask you some current information about the FDI, that you can read from your book about the current, which country gives, from which country highest amount of FDI comes, like say for example Mauritius and this and that, what is the total value, that keeps changing year to year. So you have to focus on that. As far as chapter 10 is concerned, it is nothing but historical background of India, what happened since before the independence, at the time of independence, after independence, 1991 economic reforms, everything. The information is so overwhelming. So what you can do is simply cover all the question given at the back of ICI material. That will help you cover chapter 10. And if you are not happy with that, then you will just go through the questions that I have shared from where all the important information I've taken and made an MCQ out of it. There are around 100 MCQs. If you cover that, that will be more than enough. But remember one thing, dear, the best way to crack any examination, whether it's economics or any other paper, is by solving the question. Solve as many questions as possible. As many questions as possible, because when you're reading, your mind can be at 10 different places, and many times it so happens that we have read something but we could not recall just after 1 hour what we have read, because we were not focusing. But when you're solving the question, you are completely focusing, and when you're focusing, you'll be able to understand the idea and retain the idea better. So keep solving the question, and if you're stuck, then open your class notebook and revise it, and again close it back, and again go back to solving the question. If you solve all the question that I'm going to share with you guys, then you can easily score above 90 in the subject of economics, and that will help you, and by adding a lot to your total aggregate, because you have to score minimum of 200 marks also. So if you're scoring 90 marks in economics, then you are adding significant amount of extra marks to cover your aggregate. It will work as a buffer, God forbid, if you are on the line wherein you are fighting for the aggregate. So I hope this helps. All the best, and remember, it's just an examination. You have to do here what you have to do over there, that is reading less and solving question more and more. Bye bye, take care, and all the best.